Some doors, once opened, can never close the same way again. But Emily chose to face it, not for revenge, not to sacrifice, but to forgive. Because sometimes the bravest thing isn't walking into the dark. It's letting go and learning how to live on. If this story spoke to you, leave a quiet mark with a like. Subscribe so you won't miss the next journey, where light and shadow always walk side by side. And if you've ever felt like there was no way back, share it below. Someone out there might be waiting to hear your voice. We'll see you on the other side of the next door. Hey there, I'm Ira Thomas Glass. Today I'm excited to take you on this journey with me. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss out on more captivating stories from us. Now, let's dive right in. In it, she wrote, "Don't wish for a child. Wish that you are brave enough to love it, even if that means you must disappear. I'm sorry, children." She took off the bracelet and placed it on the floor. Then she took a knife and cut her hand, not deeply, just enough for a drop of blood to fall onto the bracelet. Not to offer as a sacrifice, but to remember. A light flickered on. The souls vanished, this time not being sucked away, but set free, as light as clouds dissolving after rain. David smiled, his eyes relieved. "I'm proud of you." Then he too disappeared. For the last time, Emily stood alone in the white room. No more blood, no more demons, no more mysteries, only absolute silence. An ending, a beginning. 17 years later, Emily, now a researcher in genetic memory, published a book titled The First in All Wishes. David shook his head. "No, you cannot repay love with sacrifice." Emily cried, "Then why was I called back? Why do I have this bracelet? Why is there still a door open?" David looked up at the ceiling. "Because the darkness hasn't stopped yet. You are the last one who can lock everything away. Not with blood, not with sacrifice, but with one thing. And that is forgiveness." Emily turned around. She saw the faint figures of children surrounding the room. The souls of the young, the children who were chosen, forgotten, sacrificed by desperate prayers. She lowered her head. Emily stood up and stepped inside. Inside was the familiar circular room, but now there was only one figure sitting in the center. A man with his back turned, his hair silvery white, a worn brown coat on his shoulders. Emily walked slowly. The figure didn't turn, but when she approached, he whispered, "It's been so long since you've come back." Emily froze. That voice she could never forget. "Father?" The man turned. It was David. His eyes were different, the gaze of someone who no longer belonged to this world, but still gentle, like a small flame in the dead of winter. "You've grown. Well done." Emily rushed to hug him, but her arms passed right through him. Emily descended into the old basement. But strangely, it had changed. No longer dark, no longer terrifying. It was simply white. White walls, white floor. No sign of life. In the center of the room stood a low stone table. On it was an old photograph, a man holding a little girl. Both were smiling. The sun shone through their shoulders. Emily immediately recognized it. She had never returned to this place. She only knew that somewhere, in the silence, her past was waiting for her to open the door. In her hand was the faded pink bracelet. The word Firefly was still barely visible. McRae had kept it, then handed it to her when she turned 18 with one simple sentence: "If one day you're ready, come back to where your father gave his life." Emily had never asked more. No one had ever told her. She just grew up without remembering her father. But sometimes, In her dreams, there would be a whisper, "Fly home, Firefly." She pushed the door open. Inside, dust covered the room and a light wind howled. But everything was just as described in the records. A place once suspected to be a cult's hideout, but later dismissed as nothing more than a wild rumor. No one had ever believed McRae's story. McRae had disappeared 3 years ago. He left behind a letter. David smiled. "I'm here. I came for you." And he held her tightly, unaware that his body was beginning to lose its color. McRae shouted, "No, this can't be!" David turned to him, smiling faintly. "Take care of her. Help her grow up without ever knowing this. Don't let her remember." His voice cracked. His hands began to dissolve into glowing dust. Emily screamed, "Daddy! Daddy, don't go!" David bent close, whispering, "Firefly, fly home, sweetheart." And then he was gone. Only the pink bracelet remained, spinning once on the floor before coming to a stop. The autumn breeze gently swept through the Oregon mountains. The pine trees rustled. The sky, a dull gray, hung like a veil over memories that could never be allowed to repeat. Emily, now 22, stood before the old wooden house, preserved as a local heritage site. The roof had been replaced. The whitewashed walls were spotless, but David's eyes filled with tears. "No, Emily is real. She's real." The creature spread its arms. "To retrieve a soul not yet offered, you must give one in willing exchange." McRae grabbed David's arm. "Then I'll do it." David spun around. "No, no one dies for her. Listen to me. I lost my whole squad in Afghanistan because I lived. I wasn't supposed to. But you still have your daughter. You still have a reason. Let me—" "No!" David roared. Then he stepped toward the altar. He stared at the creature and spoke each word with steel in his voice. "Then take me. I offer my soul. But leave Emily whole. Do not touch her memories. Do not touch her heart." This is it, what they once called the third watcher of the chapel, a being that feeds on regret and love left incomplete. David shouted, "Emily didn't choose this. She never agreed to the ritual." The creature bowed its head, then answered, not with one voice but many, children, parents, priests, and David's own voice among them. "It does not matter. The father made the vow. The mother pleaded. The child is but the result of a desperate wish." David froze. A flash of memory jolted through him. Hospital lights. The day the doctor said he and his wife couldn't. She lay motionless, her arms and legs loosely bound by strands of silver thread, as if those threads themselves were anchoring her soul. David moved instinctively, but a voice echoed out, dry, deep, and empty as wind through an ancient tomb. "You have no right to take her. A soul not offered will claim its debt from the Father's blood." From the shadows behind the altar, a colossal figure emerged. It had no face, just a human shell, pale as paper soaked in water, and thousands of long black strands of hair covering its body like cobwebs. Each strand dangled, and at the end of each one, a child's face, asleep, dreaming. McRae's voice trembled. He saw himself, 8 years old, hiding in a closet while his parents screamed at each other. Doors slamming, shouting, crying. Don't let it choose him. Don't let it name him the first. He shook his head violently. The memory vanished. Up ahead, McRae suddenly stopped. Something's testing us, using our own mistakes. David stepped forward. The flashlight flickered in his grip. They reached a bend, and the chamber that opened before them made both their hearts nearly stop. A circular hall, ancient, like a miniature Roman Colosseum. Surrounding them were stone pedestals. each holding a childlike figure, sitting silently, faces blurred, hands limp, completely still. In the center stood a black stone altar, and upon it, Emily. Etched on it was a single word, Firefly. McRae helped David to his feet. We just faced what the old ones called a bequest, a kind of pact between a soul and something that existed before the first light. David clenched the bracelet. I'm getting her back, even if I have to walk through hell. McRae nodded, pointing toward a crack at the far end of the room. We're not at the end yet. This was just the outer door. David wiped his tears. Then we keep going. On the ceiling of the room, after they had gone, faint lines began to emerge, like blood soaking through the stone. Choose the wrong name, lose the child. Choose the right name, lose yourself. The narrow passage behind the holding chamber was barely wide enough for a single. It wasn't the eyes. It wasn't the face. It was the smile. The smile of something that had never learned how to be human. Wide, twisted, and stretching all the way to the ears. McRae roared, "Back off! That's not Emily!" The cage exploded. David dropped to his knees, clutching the bars. "It's me! I'm here! I'm taking you home!" McRae placed a hand on his shoulder, eyes sharp with caution. "Wait, something's not right." David gripped the cage, trying to pry it open, but the cords burned with heat the moment he touched them, so hot it seared his hands. He cried out in pain, stumbling back. Then the girl's voice again, but this time no longer trembling, empty. "Do you remember the night I had a fever, Daddy? What did you do?" David's throat tightened. He remembered perfectly. "I held you all night. I read you the little firefly who wasn't afraid of the dark. And I told you." David stepped in first. McRae followed close behind, flashlight trembling in his hand. But the beam barely reached a few feet before it was swallowed by a darkness thick as ink. Inside, the room had no clear shape. The walls seemed to shift every time they looked away. The air smelled like ash and burnt hair. Every step echoed like a footfall on the surface of water. Then David stopped. In the center of the room stood an old wooden cage, large enough to hold a grown adult. Tattered strips of ancient talismans hung from the outside, written in a language no one could read. Ropes wrapped around it, and in the middle of the cage, a little girl sat silently, hair draped, and then they stopped. A stone door stood before them. Carved into its surface were 3 lines. Her eyes will see before yours. Her ears will hear before you understand. But if you remember her name, the door will open. David's throat tightened. He closed his eyes, and in his heart, he remembered holding Emily for the first time. The first time she called him Dada. The time she whispered to her mother, "I have a secret name, but I won't tell, not unless I'm really scared." He opened his eyes, placed his hand on the stone door, and whispered, "Firefly." A sharp click echoed. The door began to open. When David placed the Reverend's journal on the table, the old man took one look and gasped, "Dear God, this is the original. I thought it burned in the fire of 76. David pressed, "Is there any map, any record of the chapel's underground tunnels, anything that leads straight down?" The old man hesitated, then slowly stood, dragging out a dusty notebook from a crumbling drawer. Inside was a floor plan of the chapel, dated 1823. There were 3 basement levels. The third had no staircase from the second, only a narrow passage leading from behind the pulpit, marked as Sacrifice Route. David whispered, "It's still there." That night they returned once more to the chapel. With hammers they broke down the wall behind the pulpit, and just like the map showed, A narrow corridor opened, leading deeper than the old basement ever went. The air was thick, stifling. Flashlights flickered, as if drained by some unseen force. Step by step, they moved through the tight. A child's cry. Faint, far away. David dropped to his knees at the mouth of the well, shouting, "Emily, it's Daddy! Can you hear me?" And for the first time, a voice answered. "Daddy, I'm cold. I'm scared." It was her voice. David moved to jump in, instinctively, but a hand held him back. It was McRae. Gritting his teeth, "No, if you go down now, we lose both of you. If I do not write this down, no one will believe it. All the pastors after me, they hid the truth. None of them wanted to admit that the thing beneath the stone floor had once been summoned. They believed if they sealed it off, if they never spoke of it again, it would forget. But it does not forget. It waits, and with each generation, a child disappears. No one connects the dots. All it takes is time, and the town lulls itself back to sleep." David closed his eyes, took a deep breath, then said softly, "Emily wasn't the first." McRae nodded. "And if we don't stop this, she won't be the last." Suddenly, the cellar trembled. The stone walls groaned. Dust rained from the ceiling. The well, still open, still breathing, emitted a new sound, someone crying. But now, his words were resurrected through David's trembling hands. They asked for a rite called the third altar ceremony. 3 invitations, 3 bells, 3 songs, and a name. If the name is spoken correctly, it will come, and it will choose. The children are the ones who hear it best. The whispers in the walls, the dreams of fire, the shadows at the foot of their beds. I forbade them from going near the chamber below, but still, one of them vanished. David paused, hand shaking. McRae quietly said, "Could it be that the Reverend was the first one to open the door?" David flicked to the last pages. One was torn halfway, but enough remained to read the final entry. But neither of them knew that they had just opened a door sealed shut for over 2 centuries. A door that didn't just lead to where Emily was being kept, but led straight into the guilty past of the town of Brookhaven. June 1841. They came at dawn, when the mist had yet to lift. The woman in the black cloak stood at the chapel gate, eyes unblinking, smiling as if she already knew everything that was about to happen. David flipped through the brittle, yellowed pages of a small journal he found tucked inside a stone crevice near the room with the well. The leather cover was cracked, the ink faded, but the content remained chill. David raised his head, eyes red with emotion. That old woman, she said, "The door only opens when the caller knows the third name." McRae shook his head. "This is all superstition. This area used to be a missionary settlement. All that nonsense comes from 18th century immigrant rituals. Nothing here is real." But then, the walls began to groan, not from wind. David backed away, drenched in cold sweat. McRae shouted, "We're not playing your sick game. This is a crime." The voice laughed, a shrill, playful cackle. And then from the well's darkness, something was thrown up. It landed with a wet slap. And then, from the darkness behind, a hand landed on his shoulder. McRae, panting, terrified, but still with him. David turned. "There's something down there," he said. "I saw eyes." McRae shook his head. No, not real eyes. I think someone's messing with us. This whole cellar could be built to create illusions." But just as he said that, a voice rose from the bottom of the well. Not a child's voice, not an adult's either, but something disturbingly in between, as if two voices were speaking at once from the same mouth. You don't know my name, but the little girl does. She called me 3 times, like a diamond in the sky. David shouted, "Emily!" He ran toward the voice, ignoring McRae's frantic yelling behind him. The stone corridor led him into a larger room. No windows, no exit. But in the center, there was a dry well, not the typical brick kind. This one was a circular hole, edged with stone carved in spiral patterns, plunging deep into blackness, and it almost seemed to breathe. Air rose gently from its depths, reeking of old blood and rusted iron. David shone his light down. A small room, no more than 4 square meters, and inside, an old wooden chair with frayed cloth restraints. On the opposite wall were charcoal drawings, exactly like the image of the little girl he'd seen earlier. But this time, there was a trembling line of text scrawled beneath it. She said if I stop singing, she'll take Daddy instead. David felt his heart stop. Emily used to love lullabies before bed. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, her favorite. Then a sound came from the left side of the dark corridor, very faint but unmistakable. Singing. It echoed through the damp, broken space, but carried an oddly sweet tone. The air beneath the chapel seemed to swallow all sound. Every step David took echoed heavily against the cold stone stairs, like the reverberations in an ancient crypt. He wasn't sure why he was doing this, but when you're a father, sometimes reason no longer matters. The beam of his flashlight swept across the walls, revealing the marks of time. Moss, claw-like scratches, and hundreds, perhaps thousands of crude symbols carved into the stone, overlapping like whispers that were never spoken aloud. Behind him, McRae still stood on the steps, hesitating. He shouted, "David, stop! We need lights! We need backup!" But David didn't stop. He knew that if he turned back now, he'd never forgive himself. He moved deeper in. Then the flashlight hit something, and he froze. "I never saw this on the old building plans," McRae muttered. David lit his flashlight, pointed it down. The walls were damp, aged, and covered in childlike scribbles. One of them was a little girl, with pigtails, a floral dress, holding a teddy. "You're right, but I have this feeling like she's still alive. Somewhere, not far, and I can't just sit around." McRae sighed. "Then I'm going with you, back to that stone chapel. So you'll see it's just an empty shell, and we can stop chasing ghosts." At 11:20 a.m. that day, they entered the abandoned chapel again. Sunlight pierced through shattered windows, casting blade-like rays across the darkness. The air was colder than usual, unnaturally so. McRae inspected every corner, every room. But then, as he stepped into the main hall, the one where David had found the ribbon, both men heard it. Knock, knock. 3 distinct knocks from beneath the rotting wooden floor. David crouched. There was a round wooden plank, like a trapdoor, but no handle. They except his wife. 2 months earlier, Julia had once told him, half joking, half worried, that sometimes Emily would wake in the middle of the night, stare at the wall beside the window, and say, "She's singing to me." Julia thought it was a dream. David had brushed it off. But this woman, how did she know? David tightened his grip on the paper, but when he looked up, she was gone. No sound, no trace, not even a rustled branch. The next morning, David told everything to Sheriff McRae, a former Iraq vet, known for being tough but fair. McRae wasn't convinced. "David, I get that you're in pain. People cling to anything when they're desperate." David snapped. David frowned. "Mildew," he said, "and dripping water. but nothing else. The woman nodded, as if confirming something. Then she pulled from her suitcase a faded piece of paper, seemingly a page torn from an old journal. She handed it to him. On its scrawled handwriting read, "When the wind chime rings 3 times, the door opens, but only if the caller knows the 3rd name." David read it, confused. "What is this?" The woman looked at him, her eyes now shimmering. "You think you know everything about your daughter? No. There are children who see things adults can't, who hear things grown-ups dismiss as dreams." David turned around. At the far end of the fence, beneath an old chestnut tree, someone was sitting. It was a woman, tattered clothes, tangled hair, eyes glinting faintly in the moonlight. She sat on an old rug, and in front of her was a small, worn-out suitcase. David approached, cautiously. "What are you doing here?" The woman looked up. Her voice was hoarse but clear. "I'm not taking anything. I'm just waiting for the right time." "What time?" She didn't answer his question. Instead, she pointed toward the stone chapel. "You went in there, didn't you? Did you hear anything strange?" After 3 days of fruitless searching, the name Emily Parker was no longer just a family's grief. It had become an obsession for the entire town of Brookhaven. Flyers with her photo were plastered across every street corner, gas station, pharmacy, even on the front window of the local sandwich shop. Though everyone knew, it was mostly in vain. A 6-year-old girl, gone without a trace, in broad daylight, in a town where everyone knew everyone? No, this wasn't normal. On the 3rd night, just after the lights at the church went out, David Parker stood silently beside the old wooden fence leading out to the field behind the stone chapel. The moon was dim, the air heavy with night fog. He stood there. Julia was different. After 2 weeks without news, she broke down completely. She stopped speaking, stopped eating, stopped sleeping. She was admitted to a psychiatric facility with severe depression and early signs of delusion. In the doctor's notes it read, "Patient repeatedly asks if I hadn't let her wander, if I hadn't looked away for a second." The story doesn't end there, but before I go on, you need to understand one thing. Every time a child disappears without a trace, something in the darkness begins to move. And not all of it is human. It was 1:37 p.m. David stepped out of the old building, his face pale. He called out to everyone. And then the chaos began. Police arrived at 2:10 p.m. Volunteers spread out in all directions. Search and rescue teams brought dogs. Drones were flown in from the next state over. Some people combed the nearby creek. Others pushed deep into the pine forest to the west. Not a single trace. Only the ribbon. The blue floral dress someone remembered seeing her wear that morning. And one name, Emily, echoing across the town for weeks afterward like a desperate prayer. Some nights, people saw David sitting alone under the tree where they'd once spread their picnic blanket. He said nothing, just held the small pillow Emily used to sleep with. No reply. A woman named Marla, mother of a boy who had been playing with Emily, walked over. "I haven't seen her either. I thought she was with Caleb's group." 10 minutes passed, then 20. Julia was now barefoot, running through the bushes, shouting, "Emily, Emily, sweetheart." David rushed toward the abandoned stone house. Broken windows, moss-covered bricks, a rear door hanging off its hinges. He stepped inside, hands slightly trembling. The air was thick with mildew, dust, and something else, something ancient, seeping through the cracks. In the middle room, he saw a broken wooden chair, a rolled-up rug, and a light blue ribbon, the kind Emily always wore. He picked it up. It still smelled faintly of lavender. Julia always... David sat beside his wife under a tree, occasionally glancing at Emily skipping across the grass, feeling that indescribable warmth only a parent knows. Julia wiped the sweat from her daughter's forehead with a napkin and said, "Don't go near the old chapel, okay? It's dangerous over there." Emily nodded her tiny head and ran off again, her braided hair swinging in the breeze. Time passed. As usual, around 1 p.m., the kids were called back for lunch. People gathered. The adults began setting up the tables, lighting the grill, and preparing for the town's annual baking contest. Emily wasn't among the kids who returned. David looked around, still calm. "She's probably just playing somewhere nearby," he said. Julia stood up, scanning the area, calling louder, "Emily, where are you, sweetie?" Julia, the mother, was an elementary school teacher. Gentle, a little anxious, the kind of person you trust the first time you meet her. And then there was Emily, their daughter. 6 years old, loved dolls, adored wildflowers, and had a laugh like silver bells in the wind. Emily was their greatest joy. She was their only child, born after Julia suffered 2 miscarriages, which is why anyone who saw how David and Julia treated Emily could tell that little girl was their entire world. The picnic began like every other year. There were sandwiches, grilled meats, fresh lemonade. A small speaker played light classical music. The children. June 2011. A warm, sunny Sunday like many others. The church held its annual picnic on the grounds behind the old chapel, a building that had once been a small monastery in the 1960s, now a gray, crumbling stone house abandoned after a roof fire in 1998 rendered it unusable. The Parker family arrived early. They were always first to show up, always willing to help set up tents, prepare tables, and test the sound system for the choir. David Parker, the father, was a former Marine, tall, quiet, with light brown hair and calloused hands. Some stories, when you first hear them, you simply shake your head and forget. But then, there are stories that feel like they find you. They cling to your mind, making you think about them while driving, while making coffee, or waking up in the middle of the night from a dream. The story I'm about to tell you is one of those. Brookhaven, Texas, a small town with a population just above 3,000. No shopping malls, no airport. The biggest structures in town are the high school football field and the First Baptist Church, where everyone gathers every Sunday morning to pray, chat, and share homemade desserts after service.